Ladies and gentlemen, you are all please requested to settle down so that we can start with our session. Respected guests, we will now commence with our first forum on great power competition and its impact on peace and security in Global South. I request the chair for the first session, Honorable Ambassador Aizaz Ahmad Chaudhry, and our keynote speaker for the session, Senator Mushahid Hussain Sayyed, Chairman Pakistan-China Institute, to please take their seats on the stage. I would now request the worthy speakers for this session, Professor Wali Raza Nasser, Majid Khadouri, Professor of International Affairs and Middle East Studies, Johns Hopkins University, Professor Dr. Igor Panarin, Member of the Academy of Military Sciences, and Professor Dr. Victor Gao, Vice President, Center for China and Globalization, to kindly take their seats on the stage. Our chair for the session, Ambassador Aizaz Ahmad Chaudhry, has served as member of the Foreign Service of Pakistan for 37 years, rising to the rank of Foreign Secretary. His last diplomatic assignment was Ambassador of Pakistan to the United States of America. He also served as Additional Secretary for UN and Disarmament and Deputy Permanent Representative of Pakistan to the United Nations. Presently, he is chairman of Sanobar Institute, Islamabad, an independent voice on issues of strategic importance. He has authored 3 books and numerous research and opinion articles, including his memoir, Diplomatic Footprint. I will now hand over the floor to the chair for session's proceedings, please. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My first word must be that of gratitude and commendation to Islamabad Policy Research Institute and its President General Raza, Dr. Raza, Ambassador Raza, wearing several hats. And I want to announce something to you which is already known, which is the topic of this session, Great Power Competition and its impact on peace and security in Global South. As you all are aware, the world order that was created some 80 years ago is in distress, and one of the defining features of this disorder is the major power competition. Some 7 years ago, in the national security strategy of the first term of President Trump, strategic competition with Russia and China, or shall I say with China and Russia, became the top national priority for the United States. Ever since, we have seen this competition intensify, and many countries in the Global South are concerned where the world is headed. There is a concern that this competition might morph into a Cold War of the like that the United States had with Soviet Union. Some are also concerned that the world might get divided into camps again, or this might competition might veer towards conflict. Although the leadership of the United States and China have repeatedly assured that this competition will not veer towards conflict, but there are lingering concerns. What if the world gets divided into camps and the countries of the global south are called upon to make difficult choices? What should countries of the global south, including Pakistan, do in such a situation? That is something that we want to discuss today in this very worthy panel, in which we will have the keynote speech by Senator Mushahed Hussain Sayyid. I think there is no one in this hall who doesn't know who Mr. Mushahed Hussain Sayyid is. He is very well known as a former federal minister and presently chairman of an institute called Pakistan-China Institute. He is also, and also Africa, Pakistan-Africa Institute. And then he has served as chairman Senate's Defense Committee, chairman Parliamentary Committee on China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and I couldn't go on and on. But this CV is there for all of you to see. We are also fortunate to have with us Dr. Wali Nasr, again another very important name in the field of international affairs. He has been associated with the Johns Hopkins University for considerable time, but also has been a non-resident fellow senior fellow at the Atlantic Council South Asia Center. He has authored several books. Actually, I came to know him from his second or third book, The Shia Revival. What a phenomenal study that was. But later on, I had the pleasure of knowing and meeting him when I was myself in Washington, D.C. Then we have Dr. Igor Nikolaevich. He is presently serving as a full member of the Academy of Military Sciences of Russia, where I had the pleasure of visiting many moons ago. He is the author of more than 20 books, including famous ones like Information War and Power, Information War and Diplomacy, and so on. Then we have Professor Victor Gao, who is the chair professor of Suzhou University, chairman of China Energy Security Institute, vice president of the Center for China and Globalization, and chairman of Yale School Association of China. He is a licensed attorney at law also in the state of New York. So what a formidable panel we have, and the subject is of phenomenal import for countries like Pakistan. So may I now, first of all, invite Senator Mushahed Hussain Sayyid for his keynote. Let me remind you, gentlemen and ladies, that he'll speak for 15 minutes, then every panelist will speak for 10 minutes from the podium, and then we'll open the floor for question and answer session. Sir, you have the floor.
Good afternoon and Assalamu alaikum. In the name of the Almighty, the Lord of all mankind. I am particularly pleased to be speaking at the Margalla dialogue from the platform of the Islamabad Policy Research Institute, IPRI, the think tank that I founded in 1999, 25 years ago, when I was Minister for Information in the aftermath of Pakistan becoming a nuclear power. And I'm very pleased that under the leadership of General Ambassador Dr. Muhammad Raza, really a scholar and a thinking general, the IPRI has now achieved new heights of excellence and as a place for brainstorming among different countries and cultures. I would like to warmly welcome the foreign visitors who have come to Pakistan, especially the distinguished panelists sitting on the podium. And I would also like to compliment Ambassador Azaz Chaudhry who is the chair of the panel, for his excellent book, Diplomatic Footprints, which is basically a memoir about his diplomatic career. Ladies and gentlemen, when we speak about the emerging global realities, we are seeing a world in turbulence and transformation. And this has been referred to by different world statesmen. President Xi Jinping said that we are witnessing once-in-a-century changes. Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, said that we are witnessing epochal tectonic change. President Macron of France had mentioned that 300 years of Western hegemony is now coming to an end. And recently I saw a discussion which was online on 7th of September in London at the Financial Times Festival by a unique one actually, by the two chiefs of intelligence, the CIA chief Bill Burns and the MI6 chief Richard Moore, where they both mentioned that the global order is facing challenges of a kind that have never been witnessed before since the Cold War. So what are the emerging global realities that we talk about? I would start with focusing on three of those. The Economist wrote, and I quote, on 9th of May 2024 in a cover story, that the Western-led liberal international order is slowly coming apart. And they added that the collapse of this liberal international order could be sudden and irreversible. End of quote. And I would say that this so-called liberal international order today lies buried under the rubble of Gaza, where this so-called international liberal order has displayed double standards on human rights, on lives of people, and a failure to stop the Gaza genocide by Israel, in which most of the proponents of this so-called liberal international order have been complicit. So we are seeing this slow motion unraveling of this post-World War II global order, and that is being replaced, as the president of IPRI rightly said in his introductory remarks, that the Asian century is now irreversible. So a shift in the global center of gravity is happening inexorably and inevitably. The second important reality is the historic and the spectacular political comeback of President Trump. And I'm very pleased that my friend from the United States is here, Steve Cole. He was a journalist when I was also a journalist. And he and I have one thing in common, that we both had correctly predicted that President Trump will win. And Steve Cole in America and myself in Pakistan. So this is also, and President Trump will be the first American president after John F. Kennedy who does not represent the US security establishment or the deep state. In fact, he has given forward a 10-point plan on how to dismantle the deep state. So he will not follow the playbook of the Washington establishment, the Washington military industrial complex. He will go by instinct, and hopefully we will see a calmer world, because he has said he is not a cold warrior and he is not one who will foment new conflicts, and he has promised to end the war in Ukraine. So that is another very significant development. And the third one, which we witnessed before us in a changing, turbulent and transforming world, are two contrasting narratives. One being put forward by China, which talks of connectivity, which talks of cooperation, enunciated by President Xi Jinping, the Belt and Road Initiative, which today has 152 countries, which is the most important diplomatic and developmental initiative of the 21st century, bringing together countries, civilizations, cultures in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Middle East, and Europe, in which China has spent in the last 10 years plus $1 trillion in 3,000 projects. And as opposed to this, we see a contrasting narrative coming from West, from Washington, which is security-centric, which is somewhat militaristic, which smacks of a new Cold War, which talks of containment of Russia and Ukraine or Europe, containment of China, and that we have seen the results of that flawed policy. In Afghanistan, after 9/11, the United States of America squandered, spent, wasted $2.2 trillion in 20 years with $100 million a day over the 20-year period. And at the end result was the regime they ousted, they welcomed them back, the Afghan Taliban. So this is the broader context when we are talking about in the current situation. And the most important development for us also, when we come to our region, we see some positive signs. I would say that in our region where Pakistan is located, which is going to be the very important region, and I would say 60% of Trump administration's foreign policy will revolve around the region. Countries like Iran, Russia, China, and India, and Pakistan is the center of it all. We are seeing the emergence of what I call a greater South Asia as a geo-economic concept, bringing together South Asia, Central Asia, China, Iran, Afghanistan, economy, energy, roads, railways, ports, pipelines. That is a new world that is opening up. And in South Asia also, we are seeing that only one country is going against this trend, which is a positive. That is India, which is part of America's new Cold War strategy because they are trying to be the frontline state on behalf of the American military-industrial complex against China, which is again a tried, tested, and failed formula. And ladies and gentlemen, we are very positive signs which I mentioned in South Asia. We are seeing a troika of what I call democracy, connectivity, and rejection of Indian hegemony among the states of South Asia. Maldives, they had a campaign, India out of Maldives. That's how they won the election. In Nepal, they have a Maoist government in power. In Sri Lanka, the JVP or the People's Liberation Front, a leftist organization, has come to power. Elections. And we are also seeing a revolution in Bangladesh, a student revolution, which has overthrown the Indian proxy and overthrown Indian hegemony. Because in Bangladesh, the student revolution, they call it the second liberation. And the liberation is from Indian domination. And now it is rebranding itself as Muslim Bengal, Bangladesh. And I think that is a new opportunity for countries like Pakistan to move forward. When we talk of our region also, I would also mention that Pakistan is playing a key role as the hub of this regional connectivity. And we are one country that has been playing a role of a bridge between East and between the West. So in this context, in a changing and turbulent world, we also see the emergence and the rise of what is known as the Global South, which is the world's majority. And one of the consequences of this great power competition, the implications for a region has been, I'll just give you one example, the Indo-Pacific strategy. That has now roped in countries like India, Japan, Japan against China, and South Korea also, and Philippines. But that has found few takers in most of Asia. And in fact, it has spawned instability because it emboldened some countries like India to annex occupied Kashmir, also to try to impose their diktat, which has failed. So in this context, it is very important that the Global South which has emerged as a major potent new factor trying to bring about the building blocks of an alternate global order through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, through BRICS, and the key props of this alternate global order are what 3Ds I call it, because I was in Moscow for the BRICS conference. I was also in Vladivostok. Then I was in Beijing for the conference hosted by President Xi Jinping, the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. These 3Ds are going to be the key elements. Democratization of the international system based on equality among nations, based on upholding the UN Charter, based on international law, and rejecting a diktat of any one single superpower or one group of countries based in the G7. The second one is demilitarization of this global order. And I think perhaps unwittingly, President Trump will contribute to that process because he is, as I said, he is not for NATO expansion. And NATO expansion was one of the reasons that we had the conflict in Ukraine. And he was not one for building new military alliances and wasting money like they have done. Because in the last 1 year, $82 billion of the United States, $64 billion for Ukraine, and $18 billion for Israel have been spent on war. And the third one is the de-dollarization process which is taking place. Today, there are 193 members of the UN. 130 have more trade with China than they have the United States. And out of those 193 members, 68 countries have announced that they are willing to engage in trade and economic interaction, not based on the United States dollar, but rubles, reals, RMB, rupee, rand, and so forth. So this is the contours of a new emerging global order where the dawn of the Asian century, the rise and resurgence of the global south are there, and we hope that we can play a role in building this more peaceful, more prosperous, and better tomorrow without any overlords and without any underdogs. I thank you for your presence and your patience, and I welcome the initiative of the IPRI to have this important meeting at a time of change in which Pakistan, along with other middle Muslim powers, is going to be a key player for the next 10 years. Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, reshaping the future of Asia in their respective regions. Thank you so much.
Of ideas have come up, and I have taken notes of some of them. We'll take them up in the question answer session. May I now invite Professor Wali Nasr for sharing his thoughts. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Let me begin by thanking IPRI for inviting me here. It's really great to be at the Margalla dialogue and also be part of this very distinguished panel. And I would sort of follow up on what the previous speaker, Mr. Shahid Hussain, said, but I would probably focus much more from the way in which these same set of issues may be viewed from Washington, particularly in light of the elections that we've had, but also from a region I work on most, which is West Asia, this region from Pakistan through the Middle East. I mean, there's no questioning that the international liberal order, or the world order as we knew it, has been under stress and is a recognition that it's transitioning or collapsing. I mean, this really began with the Obama administration, with the realization that China was rising as a major challenger for global economic supremacy. And as the Americans saw it, the era of harmonious relations with China and the harmonious rise of China was at an end. And that ultimately meant that the idea of a unipolar world dominated by the United States on the economic and political sphere might be changing into at least a bipolar world, if not a multipolar world. The other issue is that the international liberal order itself has been under assault, largely because of the rise of a rebellion against globalization, which is the economic pillar of the international liberal order in both the United States and Europe. this so-called rise of populism in Europe and in the United States essentially is a challenge to the economic basis of the international liberal order. So it's a good question whether the international liberal order makes sense without an international, the economic part of it. And now I would say the war in Gaza has put to question even the legal, political, moral, ethical side of the international liberal order. Now the conclusion often, particularly outside the United States, but also within the United States, is that these two things, in other words, the primacy of the United States and the viability of the international liberal order go hand in hand. This definitely was the assumption of the Democrats, both the Obama administration and the Biden administration. But in reality, these two things are not the same thing. In fact, President Trump represents a view that does not believe in the international liberal order, neither the economics of the international liberal order nor the legal framework of the international liberal order, but he believes in U.S. primacy. And in fact, what we will see is that there's going to be a degradation of the international liberal order, but a push, a very concerted push for asserting U.S. primacy. And so it's not a given that we're going to end up at a multipolar environment. In fact, I think for the next 3-4 years, the world is going to be in a flux. Well, we'll see whether the Trump vision will succeed to have American primacy in return to a unipolar world, while at the same time shunting aside globalization and the economic, legal, and political framework under it. I mean, the goal of the United States, at least since the Obama administration, has been to either slow China's rise or to actually downsize China. In other words, basically cut it at its knees, as it was said, and prevent it from rising to the top. But the other part of this that we don't note is that the American project also involves downsizing Europe. I mean, Europe, particularly during the Biden administration, was battered, if you would, in terms of trade, with this American project of bringing manufacturing back to the United States, giving primacy to rebuilding American economy, and that's not likely to change under the Trump administration. Now, it's important to note that this struggle, which I think will go on for the next number of years, is going to unfold principally in two arenas. One is economic and one is geographic. And economically, I think the basis is going to be a pressure to what the Americans call decoupling or de-risking relations with China. But if you put aside the jargon, what it really means is ending the supply chains that currently connect the global south to China, and then the Chinese products to the global south, to Europe, and to the United States. Now, this is largely being done by either pressuring varieties of companies to move away from China, but also increasingly by using the instrument of tariffs to force shifts in choices in the supply chain, denying China access to the high-end technology that the West produces in order to slow down its technological progress. But increasingly also we have to note it's about the power of the dollar. I mean, this is, I think, where we don't see that the United States still primacy in controlling the financial markets gives it a great deal of ability to assert its primacy. And, U.S. sanctions providing access or denying access to financial systems is a very important part of asserting American primacy. Since the year 2000, as the start of the 21st century, American sanctions have increased by 900%. Now, about a third of the countries around the world are under some form of American economic sanctions. This may be sometimes for political, geopolitical disagreements, wars, etc., but the consequences are economic. And in fact, even in the debate with China, you could see that over the horizon, beyond tariffs, beyond denying China's capabilities in technology, beyond trying to downsize its national champions like Huawei, lies the issue of using America's access to financial markets and the supremacy of the dollar in order to decide the outcome. And in fact, that's where the idea of a BRICS should be understood, because this economic engagement between United States and China ultimately impacts the global South in a major way. The global South, we have to remember, has risen economically on the back of globalization. Countries in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, the ASEAN countries have prospered under the umbrella of harmonious relations between China and the United States. They've become wealthy and have climbed the ladder of economic progress because they were able to leverage a flat supply chain between the United States and China and being part of that global supply chain. Disruption in that supply chain by tariffs, by sanctions, by political pressure challenges them. In other words, it's not a given that all of the global South welcomes this conflict between China and the United States, or that it will not actually suffer as a consequence. And I would say that many of them don't have actually a strategy necessarily of how to contend in a world that is not a flat world of economic relations, but is a world of economic blocks. And when they are presented with zero-sum choices, that either you belong to this block or you belong to that block. Or if you want to have access to Western markets, you would have to decouple yourself from China. And the increasing interest in BRICS, for instance, is part of the thinking about how can you navigate this world, right? For the many countries in the global South, and I look at particularly countries in West Asia and countries particularly in the Persian Gulf region, the wealthy Arab monarchies, which are in the sort of eye of the storm here. The name of the game is how to maintain access to Western markets, Western technology, and take advantage of security protection of the United States, while also remain open to relationships with China. And I mean, if you looked at this issue of negotiations between Saudi Arabia and the United States about a security pact, one side of it which we see is that this is conditional on Saudi Arabia normalizing relations with Israel, and Saudi Arabia wants varieties of things from the United States in terms of security guarantees. But at the core of this is really negotiations about how much is Saudi Arabia willing to decouple from China, and what is it going to get from the United States in exchange for that decoupling from China, right? And this is not easy for Saudi Arabia, for instance, to navigate. Saudi Arabia, like UAE, wants to be part of the supply chain for chips and artificial intelligence, which means access to both markets and technology from the West. But at the same time, if you looked at their economic model, and particularly if you looked at, for instance, ideas around Vision 2030, the building of the city of Neom, it's all about the Gulf playing the role of the hub in trade between Africa and China, right? In a sense that the challenge for the Gulf, for instance, is how do you navigate sitting between these two rivalries that are emerging and maintaining both a supply chain that depends on China, which is trade from Africa to China, as well as selling energy to China, but on the other hand, also depends on being integrated into a Western technological supply chain. Now, in the United States, the geographic part of this rivalry is often associated with the Indian Ocean and with the Pacific Ocean, with the area from India to the east. I mean, the ideas of AUKUS, the ideas of Quad, are all built around sort of securitizing the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean around this emerging confrontation with China. But if you looked at it from West Asia, the American policy towards Russia and towards Iran, and particularly the use of sanctions, has also created another geographic reality, which is that of Eurasia. In other words, a pathway that goes from the Gulf through Iran to Central Asia, to Russia, and then on to China, which is sort of, if you would, is a parenthesis above the way in which the United States sees the oceans. And now this brings us to all this discussion about the corridors. I mean, the way the United States looks at these corridors from India to the Mediterranean onto Europe is a way of integrating the Gulf with India into an economic relationship, into an economic supply chain that excludes China and ultimately will bring the Middle East into a fold, or West Asia into a fold of a bloc that the United States would be able to exclude China from. But there are other corridors taking shape, which we don't talk about. There is already a north-south corridor, which is emerging from Russia through Iran and onto the Gulf countries as well. And that rivalry over these corridors, and again, that the fact that both of them run through the same countries, which is United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, it shows you the dilemma that countries that see themselves as emerging in the global south face in terms of how do they navigate this relationship. Now, going forward, what we're going to see is under President Trump is an intensification of this dynamic on multiple levels. And that will squeeze the countries of the global south. I mean, their position of each, their economic interests of each are different from one another. But there's no question that the space in which the global south had persisted and has prospered, which is a space between China and the United States, where they were able to take advantage of the economic relations between the two of them, where they didn't have to choose between them. They could have both. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia, for instance. For decades, it has had both. Very tight economic relations with China, and also very tight economic and security relations with the United States. A world in which that they cannot have those elements that until now has sustained their prosperity and security will make it difficult for them. And they have to come up with strategies to address this. And I don't want to say that they are necessarily going to be able to do it, or that the rise of multipolarity or the global south as a bloc is going to be necessarily as easy or as simple. Or at some point the global south itself may not fracture along certain lines in terms of how it addresses these sets of issues. And the other side of it as well. It's not a given that the way that President Trump is seeing this rivalry, namely, you don't need the international liberal order. In fact, you want to do away with it. It's hurt the Americans economically, that it's actually shackles around the United States behavior, and you can put it aside and you can push for American primacy through using American economic power in particular, that it's going to work. I mean, there's always a possibility that there may be an overreach there as well, and it may unravel as it goes forward. But all of it, the way I see it, and I think the way, looking at least West Asia, many countries sees it, that this is actually going to be a period of great tumult, of uncertainty, and a threat, if you would, to the stability and economic prosperity of many countries. There is not a clear view of how do you go from unipolarity to multipolarity in a satisfactory way, or how necessarily, what are the economic costs and consequences of this happening. So I do agree that we're at the cusp of something completely new in world order. But what shape it takes is really going to be decided in the next few years, because the battle is going to be really enjoined now. That President Trump has come to power with a very clear mandate in his own mind of not only reshaping America, but to reshaping the global order. And so we have to see whether, how this process unfolds. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. I think very thought-provoking. Actually, I am already jotting down several questions that have come to my mind on the basis of these two interventions. And I'm sure the audience are very keen to engage in question answer session, but we'll hear two more speeches before that. Now I'll invite Professor Dr. Nikolovich, the member of the Academy of Military Sciences in the Russian Federation. You have the floor, sir. 10 minutes. Thank you.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые участники форума, уважаемый президиум. Мне очень приятно, я признателен за возможность выступить на 5-м юбилейном форуме.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to welcome the participants of the 5th edition of the Margalla Dialogue 2024, and I would like to greet the honorable experts at the podium.
Я впервые в Пакистане и с радостью услышал от господина Гелани, бывшего премьер-министра, а ныне главы Сената, о том, что Пакистан находится на передовой мировой цивилизации.
This is my first time in Pakistan, and I was delighted to hear the words of Yusuf Raza Gilani, ex-Prime Minister of Pakistan and the current Chairman Senate, that the Pakistan is at the forefront of Asia and the global civilization.
Но я бы добавил еще то, что Пакистан – это древнейшая мировая цивилизация, индская цивилизация, и мы должны понимать, что здесь и все предыдущие докладчики, начиная с директора института и бывшего министра информации, и модератора, бывшего первого замминистра иностранных дел, показали, что они помнят и развивают древнейшие многотысячелетние традиции индской цивилизации.
Pakistan is also one of the world's oldest civilization, which is home to one of the world's oldest civilization, the Indus civilization. And it was important to understand that the previous speakers, including the honorable moderator and Senator Mushahid Hussain, also developed that Pakistan needs to develop this long-standing legacy.
Я вам представлю свою личную профессорскую точку зрения. Предыдущий докладчик из института Хопкинса сказал, что всем нам нужен навигатор, который позволит нам пройти этап перемен без потерь.
I would like to introduce my personal point of view, and I would like also to take note of the words expressed by my colleague from Johns Hopkins University, who said that we in fact need some sort of a navigator in order to navigate the current world order change.
Я подготовил 33 слайда, и те, кто захочет текст доклада на английском языке, он довольно большой, я постараюсь краткие тезисы вышлем по электронной почте, те, кто даст свою электронную почту после завершения сессии.
My PowerPoint presentation, which I would like to present today, has 33 slides. It's a very long one, so I will briefly go through it, and I'm open to sharing the text of my speech and the presentation to all those who are willing to leave their email addresses.
Итак, мы приступаем. Прошу слайды включить. Первый слайд. Вы сейчас увидите Мохенджо-Даро. Это город 5000 лет назад, центр индской цивилизации, но начало доклада моего, вот я хотел показать Ялта-2, вот тот навигатор, это моя книга 2022 года «Гибридная война Ялта-2». Сегодня господин Гелани и наш уважаемый директор института говорили много о дезинформации. Мы должны пройти через потоки дезинформации, выйти, с моей точки зрения, на Ялту-2. Только Черчилля должен заменить мудрый Си Цзиньпин.
Please run the PowerPoint presentation, and before I start, I would like to present my book, which I wrote in 2022. This is called The Hybrid War and Yalta II. In this book, I discuss the process of going through the flows of disinformation that were mentioned today, and the necessity to reach a new world order, which I call Yalta II. And the key figure in this world order, instead of Winston Churchill, should be President Xi Jinping.
Но начну с древней истории Пакистана и древней истории цивилизации. Следующий слайд я хочу включить, но у меня пока не получается.
First of all, I would like to mention that the ancient city of Mohenjo-daro was founded about 5,000 years ago. It was the center of the Indus civilization. And now I'm trying to move to the next slide.
Можно следующий? Вот, это Мохенджо-Даро. Я хотел обратить внимание, что в мире мало говорится о том, что этот легендарный город находится на территории Пакистана.
It is rarely mentioned that the ancient city of Mohenjo-daro is located on the territory of Pakistan.
Это важнейший город, который наряду с Троей, Аркаимом является центром мировой цивилизации.
This is a crucial city, and as well as the city of Archaim and Troy, they were the centers of the world civilization.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Здесь проблемы современного мира кратко перечислены, и предыдущие все докладчики, они четко о них сказали, я не буду их повторять. Следующий слайд.
This is the short list of the problems that the world faces, and they were discussed by the previous speakers, so I would not like to repeat what they said. So please, next slide.
Здесь я предлагаю вам рассмотреть некие новые подходы. Ключевой момент, вот министр бывшей информации, модератор, сказал, что он предсказал победу Трампа. И я ее предсказал, и очень рад, что это состоялась историческая победа Трампа, которая нам открывает путь к Ялте-2.
Senator Mushahid Hussain said that he predicted the victory of Donald Trump in the US general elections. I also predicted the victory of Donald Trump in Russia. And I think that his victory paves the way to the new world order, Yalta II.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Здесь немножко истории. Ключевое событие мировой истории, с моей точки зрения, это вознесение Александра Македонского на небеса.
I think that the most important point in world history is the ascension of Alexander the Great.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Вот здесь на двух грифонах Александр Македонский вознесся на небо. Но ключевой момент, что моя трактовка впервые говорит, что вознесся он на небо в 100 километрах от нашего места проведения форума, в 100 километрах от Исламабада.
Here you see the moment when of the ascension of Alexander the Great, and I would like to highlight that the place where it happened is located 100 kilometers away from Islamabad.
И теперь Трамп внешне похож на Александра Македонского.
And Trump looks like Alexander the Great.
Вы можете убедиться в этом, сравнив. И моя трактовка, что спасение Трампа от покушения – это его вознесение на небеса, получение мудрости и позитивное преобразование мира.
And I think the fact that Trump survived assassination attempt is some sort of his ascension. He became wiser and he'll help to save the world.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Здесь важно отметить, что первый передел Вселенной был осуществлен Македонским, но вот в резиденции Трампа находится бюст римского императора Августа Октавиана, который осуществил второй передел Вселенной.
As I've said, the first redivision of the universe took place at the time of Alexander the Great, and you see the bust of Alexander the Great is located at the Trump residence in the United States of America. The bust of Roman Emperor Augustus Octavianus is located at his residence, and this was at his time when the second redivision of the universe took place.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Это Александр Невский, великий русский лидер, князь, и моя трактовка, что он начал третий передел Вселенной.
This is great Russian Prince Alexander Nevsky, and in my opinion, he led the third redivision of the universe.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide.
Здесь мы видим Август Октавиан, Александр Македонский, Иван Грозный, четвертый великий русский царь, который завершил третий передел Вселенной.
Here we see the bust of the Augustus Octavianus, Roman Emperor, Alexander the Great, and Ivan IV, Russian Tsar, who finished the third redivision of the universe.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Но после этого наступила черная эра, о которой мы говорим, эра монополярного мира, либерального миропорядка, который существует и сегодня.
But after that, the dark world order emerged, a monopolar world order, a liberal world order that continues till today.
Эта эра связана с созданием Остинской компании.
It was initiated by the establishment of the East India Company.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Здесь важно понять, что есть два пути. Британский путь войны, колониализма и русский путь, путь мира.
Here it's important to understand that there are two ways to proceed. First way is the British way, the way of war and colonialism. And the second way is the Russian way, the war of peace, the way of peace.
125 лет назад в Гааге по инициативе русского царя была первая международная Гаагская конференция.
125 years ago, at the initiative of the Russian Tsar Nicholas II, The Hague hosted a peace conference.
Все предыдущие докладчики говорили о том, что глобальный юг страдает от противостояния великих держав.
The previous speakers mentioned that the global south is suffering now because of the confrontation between the great powers.
Вот хотел еще раз показать, Ялта-2 должна базироваться на принципах Гаагской конференции 1899 года.
I would like to highlight that the New World Order should be based on the Yalta II principles, and these principles are based on the ideas voiced at the peace conference dated 1899 in The Hague.
То есть мир без войн и конфликтов, о котором господин Гелани в своем приветствии нам говорил.
We're talking about a world free of wars and conflicts, which was mentioned by Chairman Gilani.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Здесь кто сегодня управляет миром? Лондон. Не Вашингтон, а Лондон и венецианцы в Лондоне, моя трактовка.
Here you see my ideas on who controls the monopolar world today. It's not Washington, it is London and the Venetians who sit in London.
Главный инструмент – это Федеральная резервная система США и глубинное государство.
Their main instrument is the US Federal Reserve System and the US Deep State.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Здесь вот вы видите мое выступление 9 сентября 1998 года. В Линце была конференция «Информационная война». Сегодня и господин директор, и господин Гелани, и бывший министр информации говорили об информационной войне, о дезинформации.
Here you see the highlights of my speech at Linz conference that took place on September 9th, 1998 in Austria. It was about the information war that has already been mentioned by Honorable Moderator and Senator Mashahid Hussein.
Тогда я впервые высказал гипотезу о распаде США на 6 частей.
At that conference, I first put forward my hypothesis about the possibility of the disintegration of the United States into 6 parts.
Вот карта развала США.
Here you see the map of the US after the disintegration.
И сегодня вопрос стоит так: сможет ли Трамп спасти Соединенные Штаты Америки?
And today's question is, can Trump save the United States of America?
Пока вопрос, но я надеюсь, что спасет.
It is an open question. I hope that he will manage to save the country.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Здесь противостояние в Линце было, обратите внимание, это мой доклад, но мне задавал господин Сорос вопрос в Линце, я на него ответил, и было противостояние. Сорос – это главный идеолог либерального миропорядка, который сегодня существует в мире.
And in Linz, I was asked a question by none other than George Soros, who is one of the key ideologists of the current liberal world order.
А внизу фотография начальника личной разведки генералиссимуса Сталина графа Николая Игнатьева и Алана Далласа, директора ЦРУ, между ними шло противостояние.
And at the bottom, you see the pictures of Mr. Ignatieff, who was the head of the personal intelligence of Joseph Stalin, and the CIA director, Mr. Dulles.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Здесь вы видите фотографию моего доклада в Вашингтоне 20 лет назад, но принципиально это помощник президента, глава администрации Киссинджера 20 лет, и мы с ним спорим о новом миропорядке 20 лет назад.
And here you see a picture of me discussing the world order with the former head of Kissinger administration and the former national security advisor to the US president, Mr. Thomas Graham.
Киссинджер умер в ноябре 23 года, и он был главным идеологом существующего монополярного строя.
Henry Kissinger died in November 2023, and he was one of the key ideologists of the current monopolar world.
После его смерти либеральный колониализм потерял курс.
And after his death, the liberal colonialism lost its goal, its mission.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide.
Итак, выборы в США, историческая победа Трампа. Но здесь хотел обратить внимание, победила позитивная точка зрения. Мир, а не война. Крепкая семья с детьми. И другие нормальные человеческие ценности.
Here you see the slide about the historic victory of Donald Trump. It was a victory of peace over war. It was a victory of traditional family and of normal human values.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Историческая фотография спасения Трампа и его вознесения на небеса. Так сказал Такер Карлсон, что Трамп вознесся на небеса, вернулся и хочет преобразовать мир в лучшую сторону.
And here you see the picture of Donald Trump after his rescue. That is his ascension in some sort, and these are the words of Mr. Tucker Carlson, who said that this was the ascension, then Trump came back, and he wants to transform the world to the better.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Здесь принципиально важно, как развивалось противостояние. Здесь говорили об Индии. Важно понять, что вторая резервная база нынешнего миропорядка – это Индия и Моди, и глобалист, и одновременно олигарх Амбани.
Here it's important to understand that the reserve control center of the Dark World Order is located in India, and it is run by Prime Minister Modi, who is a globalist, and by the oligarch Ambani.
Следующий слайд, я постараюсь, там много еще слайдов, но я быстро закончу в течение 2 минут. Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide.
Это главные враги Трампа. Следующий слайд.
Next slide.
Это принципиальный момент. Саммит БРИКС, о котором мы говорили, дает нам возможность выхода на новые позитивные рубежи конструктивного сотрудничества. Следующий слайд.
16th BRICS Summit was a crucial moment that gives us a new momentum to achieve positive results. Next slide, please.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide.
И здесь принципиально важно, здесь бывший министр информации говорил о 3D, я предлагаю международную идеологию мира 7D, вы видите вот ключевые моменты, как можно выйти на идеологическую конструкцию мира без войн и конфликтов. Следующий слайд.
This is a very important slide, in my opinion. Senator Mashahid Hussain was speaking about the 3D concept, and I would like to propose the 7 basic principles that you see on the screen that will help us to build a world free from wars and conflicts. Next slide, please.
Здесь Ялта-2 должна быть в Минске. Это памятник вещему Всеславу, чародею, князю, который мог превращаться в птицу и медведя. Он основатель Минска.
And here you see a monument in the future capital of the Yalta II world order in the city of Minsk. The monument is erected to honor the memory of the great Russian prince Vseslav the sorcerer, who had the powers to transform into bird and a bear.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Здесь геополитика Ялты-2 в Минске. Я предлагаю целую систему новых международных соглашений. Следующий слайд.
And here I propose a whole new system of international relations to be formed in Minsk during the Yalta II process. Next slide.
Первое – это создание Георуссии, как геополитического союза Германии, Италии, Австрии, России и Беларуси со столицей в австрийском городе Линц.
First of all, I propose to establish a geopolitical alliance called Georussia, which would unite Germany, Italy, Austria, Russia, Belarus with its capital in the Austrian city of Linz.
Главная задача – предотвратить мировые войны, которые англичане организовывали в Европе. И для этого нужна Георуссия. Следующий слайд.
The key idea behind this alliance is to prevent world wars organized by the British in Europe. Next slide.
Здесь Балканская конфедерация со столицей и лидером в Будапеште. Виктор Орбан может объединить Балканы.
This is the concept of the Balkan Confederation with its capital in Budapest and with its leader as Viktor Orban.
И Орбан большой друг Трампа, Трамп поможет Орбану.
Viktor Orban is a big friend of Trump and Trump will help Orban.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide.
Это Франкония. Здесь говорилось о том, что Макрон, предыдущий докладчик, говорит о падении либерального колониализма. Вот Макрон мог бы возглавить Франконию, Франция, Испания, Бельгия и Шотландия.
It was previously stated that President Macron speaks of the downfall of the liberal world order, and I propose the formation of a Franconia geopolitical union, which would include France, Spain, Belgium, and Scotland, and led by Emmanuel Macron.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Здесь принципиальный вопрос создания славянской конфедерации со столицей в Братиславе.
The Slavic Confederation establishment is also very important with its capital in the city of Bratislava.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide.
Здесь принципиально касающийся рядом регионов. Я предлагаю объединить в союз Иран, Турцию, Саудовскую Аравию, Катар, Эмираты, Ирак и Бахрейн.
Here I propose the establishment of the Eastern Alliance that would unite Iran, Turkey, Iraq, Qatar, the UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Очень много говорилось о проблеме сектора Газа сегодня, Ливана. Я предлагаю воссоздать новую Ассирию и включить туда такие страны, как Сирия, Иордания, Ливан, Палестина, независимое государство, и Кипр.
Here we today spoke about the problems in Gaza and Lebanon, and to solve this problem, I propose to establish the new Assyria that could include Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine as an independent state, and Cyprus.
Последний слайд.
And the last slide.
Я предлагаю создать новые объединенные Соединенные Штаты Трампу, но здесь специфика: Аляска должна вернуться России.
Here I propose to establish the new United States of America under Trump, but with an important detail: Alaska must be returned to Russia.
Но Канада и Объединенная Ирландия должны войти в состав Трамповской Америки.
And Canada and United Ireland must also be part of the Trump new United States of America.
Это я впервые высказываю. Но Аляска – это русская земля, и надо, чтобы она вернулась.
This is for the first time that I voice these ideas, and I personally think that Alaska is the Russian land and it must be returned to Russia.
Следующий слайд.
Next slide, please.
Я хотел в заключение сказать, что те дискуссии, которые уже есть, вчера мы с коллегами познакомились на замечательном таком ужине, говорят о том, что необходимо концентрировать экспертные усилия.
Yesterday we had a great dinner and I had a chance to communicate with different experts, and we were talking about the necessity to focus on expert consultations.
Я предлагаю создать, сегодня 5-я годовщина форума, экспертный совет, который бы мог ежегодно издавать доклады участников на постоянной основе.
And I would like to propose to establish an expert council within this forum, the fifth important Margalla Dialogue Forum, that would issue annual reports.
На этом хотел вас поблагодарить за то, что вы выслушали, и надеюсь, мои предложения будут основой для начала диалога по выработке мировой стратегии мира без войн и конфликтов. Большое спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that my proposals will pave the way for the world free from wars and conflicts. And a small disclaimer, the ideas voiced in this report do not reflect the official position of the Russian Federation or the Embassy of Russia in Islamabad. These are personal views of Mr. Igor Panarin.
Yeah, we understand that these are your views and not that of Russian Federation. Are you done, or you still want to have to say something? Okay, go ahead.
Сейчас, Игорь, подойдите, а? Поможет вопрос, ответы на вопрос. Пока слушаем. Все, я понял. Я подумал, что...
Thank you. I think it was very elaborate, kind of new world order. So now we are going to listen to Professor Gao. He is the Vice President, Center for China and Globalization. Sir, Professor Gao, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to be back in Islamabad, and I would thank IPRI for bringing me to this magnificent Margalla forum. And I'm so honored to see so many Pakistani friends, brothers and sisters, and also so many other dignitaries gathered together to talk about this very important topic that mankind is faced with. Allow me to say that whether we like Donald Trump or not, let us pause and give him congratulations because he won the election. And American people spoke, and he has a clear mandate. And I think personally, I want to give Mr. Trump, the president-elect, one big credit for his promise of not using war as an instrument of the United States in the coming 4 years. And I do hope we will give him all the best wishes. If the United States can really stick to this promise and launch and engage in no war of all kinds in the world in the coming 4 years, that will be one of the greatest achievements for President-elect Donald Trump. Now, I also want to share with you my belief that the United States in 4 years' time will be completely different than the United States of today. And the world in 4 years' time will also be completely different than the world today. Now, whether the United States in 4 years' time will be better or even better or the best, let's keep our eyes wide open to see what will happen. Whether the world will be better or worse, that's very much dependent on what we will do, because we cannot allow the world to become worse than it is today. We need to improve the world and to make sure that mankind as a whole will be better off. Now, we are talking about the world order. Allow me to make one very important point. The world order we are living through was built in 1945 upon the ashes of the Second World War. Now, the world order we built in 1945 was not meant to be unipolar or monopolar. It was meant to be multipolar. That's why we have 5 permanent members of the Security Council of the United States. That's why there is no country from the very beginning in 1945 which had the sole veto power on major decisions in the world. So when we talk about whether the world today is multipolar or unipolar, I think that question is irrelevant because the world was not meant to be unipolar. From the very beginning of the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany in Europe and the Japanese imperialist in Asia Pacific. So let's always remember that the world should be multipolar and should never be allowed to be unipolar. Now, whether there was a big country which believed that it had the only pole in the world, that's its own question. I don't think other countries in the world would ever buy that story about a unipolarity of the world of today. Now, the other thing I want to say is that you talk about China-US relations, which are claimed to be the most important bilateral relations in the world, with consequences for all of us. But here in Islamabad, allow me to give great credit and acknowledgement and gratitude to Pakistan, because Pakistan played that crucial good office's role back in 1971 to enable Dr. Henry Kissinger of the United States and China to engage in the most audacious blind date in human history, which led to the opening up of the gate and the engagement between China and the United States. So we should never forget about the great historical contribution of Pakistan in bringing China and the United States together. Now, from my personal perspective, allow me to share with you some personal observations. I think the United States now wants to isolate China, deny China's access to lots of things, for example, and throw China down to the ground as if there will be no consequences. It is impossible. Decoupling between China and the United States is like decoupling the Earth from the moon. Never try that, because you will never succeed. And if you are succeed in decoupling China from the United States, it will be even worse. And while there are people in the United States who keep talking about destined for war scenario between China and the United States, allow me to share with you my personal view. I completely refute this destined for war scenario as applied to China and the United States. The so-called Thucydides trap theory applied to China and the United States is a fallacy. Why? Because the author, a very distinguished professor at Harvard University, whom I highly admire, forget to tell mankind that all the cases of war he analyzed were conventional wars, whereas China and the United States, and with Russia, are the 2 and the 3 most important nuclear power countries. So you cannot apply conclusions you arrived at very scientifically, very professionally, to 2 nuclear powers or the 3 nuclear powers. So I always talk about the inevitability of peace between China and the United States. And now that we will have Donald Trump coming to the Oval Office very soon, who has at least publicly renounced the use of war, that means whatever problems there are between China and the United States, we need to solve them and overcome them in peace, in negotiation, in diplomacy. Now, allow me to use one very simple example. Sometimes talking about geopolitics, international relations can be confusing or misleading. So let me use one simple example. You know, in China, we have Mr. Yao Ming, the basketball celebrity, the big star. Is 2.26 meters tall. I'm his big fan. If Yao Ming walks into this room, he will be the center of attention. And if he say to all of us, I'm tall, nobody will disagree with him. If he say, I'm a basketball star, nobody will disagree with him. We all want to take pictures with him, ask for his signature or autograph. But if he says, I am the best basketball player in the world, I think we will choose to be quiet because we don't want to waste time in debating who is the best basketball player in the world. But God forbid. If Yao Ming says, I will never allow any human being to grow taller than I am, 2.26 meters tall, do you think you will agree with him or you will disagree with him? No one in the rightness of your mind will agree with Yao Ming if he says he will never allow any other human being to be taller than he is. Because we will rise up in rebellion if Yao Ming, the great national star in China, will prohibit any human being to grow taller than he is. And if he says, please work with me, listen to my dictate, deny whoever who will want to grow taller than I am, deny him milk, deny him food, nutrition of all kinds, deny him education, etc., you will not want to agree with Yao Ming. That's an example. If you use the same example to look at any other country in the world, I think we will see the reality in the world much clearer. I think Washington is suffering from what I call Tonya Harding syndrome. Who is Tonya Harding? The national figure skating champion. She was worried that Nancy Kerrigan would compete even more professionally than she is, and she will lose the championship, for example. And eventually, Tonya Harding, her husband, and the associates of theirs whacked the kneecap of Nancy Kerrigan. So I think this probably best summarizes what the United States is doing. They want to whack China's kneecap to prevent China from competing better. But the comparison probably is irrelevant because the United States says they want to prevent China from surpassing the United States. China is already a larger economy than the United States if we use purchasing power parity. China is already about 130% that of the United States. And especially if you look at, for example, manufacturing, output, etc., China is much bigger than the United States. If you talk about shipbuilding, for example, the Americans cannot sleep because China builds ship faster, quicker, more affordably, for example, than the United States. So I think going forward, the real competition should not be between China and the United States. And the choices for countries in the world should not be forced to be choose between China versus the United States. The real choice should be if China does the right thing or if the United States does the right thing. If China does the right thing, go along with China. If the United States does the wrong thing, for example, do not follow the leadership of the United States, because all countries in the world should have our own independence of the mind, our own judgment, and if you lose your own independent judgment and blindly follow the so-called leadership of any other country, you may fall into the ditch. I will stop here and I'll be very happy to join the other panelists to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think Professor Gao, you made a very clear and crystal point. Availing myself of the privilege being a moderator, I could start with a few questions and then we'll open the floor for the moderators, for the audience. Now, Senator Mashahid, I think you did mention BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, having 4 more countries and dozens of partner countries. And then we have SCO and BRI. Together, they were perceived in the West being anti-West moves, as if to rob the West of their economic dominance. But still we find many countries in the global South which are very closely connected economically with the West. Will that be a kind of, these organizations lead to decoupling of global South from the West, or do you think it's a new kind of de-risking will be provided for global South?
Thank you very much. Just 2 points. Number one, that there is a certain mindset in the West, especially in Washington, D.C., where I spent 4 years as a student in Georgetown University, and especially among the American establishment or the military-industrial complex, that constantly is in search for enemies. And they see any alternative or a different perspective as being from the other side. And the Soviet Union was there in the Cold War. Then after the collapse of communism, it was Islam. Now a favorable bogeyman is China. And China is the first non-Western, non-white power to challenge Western hegemony. So they have to, I think that these are countries which see different alternatives and choices for development, like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt. They are very close allies of the United States of America. So they are there. And I think that in this world of globalization, and you mentioned trade figures, China, US, for example, and China, Japan, for example, even China, India, this kind of decoupling is not possible at all. So I think this is just a figment of their imagination, because the kind of trade linkages, the kind of supply chains that they have, the kind of interaction that is there. This year alone, all the top American executives have trooped to Beijing to meet either President Xi Jinping or Prime Minister Li Qiang. And they've been received with open arms, and they've been welcomed, including Mr. Elon Musk himself and Bill Gates. And they've been told that China is your place for investment. And that's why you have over 20,000 plus American companies now operating in China. So I think that this is not possible. I think the rhetoric is there. The basic thing is that I would say, and I agree with Victor Gao, that America has missed the bus. Now you cannot contain or stop anybody's rise. And he gave a good example of Yao Ming. I think that's a Chinese subtle way of saying that, look here, history is history. It's all about choices, and those choices are exercised by the people of their respective countries. And China has risen, and we wish them good luck. And we are proud of China's rise, because China is a best friend and neighbor. Thank you.
I think the other day I heard an argument that it is almost impossible to stop China's rise because it has already happened, the peaceful rise. And the Chinese are not interested in any conflict. Out of 14 countries as their neighbors, perhaps they had some skirmishes with one, and that too they are trying to mend. So I think that is the direction, and we saw that in the words of Victor Gao as well. May I ask you, sir, Professor Dr. Wali Nasr, is the world heading towards, is it heading towards a clash of civilizations? West versus the East?
I mean, first, to your point, it's a saying attributed to Trotsky, who said that you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. So we have to sort of look at it that way. And secondly, I do agree with Dr. Gao that decoupling may not work, but in the effort to force the issue, there's a lot of disruption and damage that can be done in the short run. You have a road that is paved, that all of the countries in the global south have used it. China's used it. They're interested in preserving it. But if you keep creating potholes and obstacles to it, then in the short run, a lot of countries are going to face a great deal of challenges there. And I also again would reiterate that the issue of the dollar and the supremacy that the dollar has as an instrument in the hands of the United States is very, very powerful. The US may not be able to prevent countries from trading with each other, but it can deny them access to the international financial system. As the way that things are, unless BRICS and China, et cetera, come up with an alternative to the way in which the financial system works, the United States is arriving at a point that says, basically, I own the way in which the world transacts, and I can decide whether you have access to that or not. And that those kinds of disruptions do impact countries, right? And China itself may be immune to a lot of American pressure, but a lot of other countries in the global south are far weaker and far more dependent on the system. So in a way, if this clash continues, they're the ones who are going to pay the price. I think, the underlying assumption here is that there is some kind of a clash of civilization happening, not in the language that we saw during the global war on terror, but there is a sense of the West versus the rest, right? Even if you don't put it in religious civilizational language. So the West is the United States, its allies in Asia, and also Europe, which is basically being right now browbeaten to basically be subsidiary, if you would, to this economic campaign against China. Pressure is going to come on it to also decouple. Whether it's successful or not is besides the point, but that's the pressure. And definitely countries in the global south also see this in those terms. But I don't think it's going to be a repeat of the sort of a Huntingtonian view of clash of civilizations, because the fundamental issue is on the table is not civilizational. It's about economic dominance. And yes, civilizational arguments may be used at different points in this clash, but for now, the language of it is not expressed in civilizational terms.
I hope so, sure. I think I agree with you. And Victor Gao, could I ask you a question about, very specific facets of US-China competition? Mainly Donald Trump's announcement of imposing huge tariffs on imports from China and also instituting restrictions on technology exports to China. So some of the countries in the global south might actually benefit from that, because some of the supply chains will shift away from China to countries like India and perhaps others in Southeast Asia. What are your views on that aspect of Donald Trump's arrival on the global scene?
Thank you very much, sir. You are raising a very important question. First of all, the tariffs war was started by President Trump back in 2017 or 18, and it was continued and even intensified by President Biden. However, if you look at the numbers, China-US trade volume has not been reduced. It has steadily climbed and increased. So, first point I want to make is there must be a logic in China-US trade. And you can do some, pressure points to it, etc. But if you want to really fundamentally change that, it's possibly not possible. Now, the second point is that either President Trump before 2021 or President Biden now, or even the Democratic presidential nominee, Harris, they didn't tell the American people who paid the tariffs. The tariffs the US government levied on Chinese export to the United States was not paid by China. It was not paid by the Chinese government or by the so-called Communist Party of China or the Chinese exporters. They were paid in its entirety by the American people. So it is kind of a tax against the United States people. It is one important reason why inflation was running out of control, and the federal rate now stayed very high. It used to be 5% to 5.5%. Now it's coming down a little bit, etc. So if President Trump, starting on January the 20th, 2025, starts to impose maximum tariff on Chinese export to the United States, it will make China-US trade more difficult. But reality is that they will be forcing American people to pay more taxes. And it is like, in Chinese term, you drink liquid poison to quench your thirst. you may be fine for a while, but in the longer term, you bring yourself down. So I think if the United States is left with no other better choices but to impose tariffs, or even go as far as President Trump says, that he said, you no longer need to pay income tax. I will make enough money by imposing tariffs on China-US trade or trade with any other country. I don't think the economic advisors around President Trump need to let it go. They need to really educate him a little bit and say that's the wrong way to do. And many other countries tried that in the 1920s, in the 1930s, which led to the World War in 1940s, exactly. So I think China and the United States really need to sit down, whether we can have a better way. For example, my proposal has been for the past several years that China-US will increase their trade volume from currently a little bit shy of $800 billion to $1 trillion. And the United States really need to do a lot of homework to come up with goods that they can sell to China, good quality, affordable, for example, sustainable, etc. And I even want to enable China and the United States to reach what I call the reciprocal zero tariff agreement, so that President Trump will be declared one of the greatest presidents in the United States for opening the door of US export to China on a zero tariff basis. So I think between China and the United States, we need to use wisdom and our brain power rather than be seized up with these wrong propositions like decoupling or de-risking. Allow me to mention very quickly, risks are everywhere. Risks are omnipotent, omnipresent. You cannot de-risk anything. The best you can do is to manage risks. So, de-risking is the biggest risk in the world of today. Managing risk is the right thing for the United States, for China, for all the other countries to do. Thank you.
Very much. This is a very weighty argument. I have heard this and read about it, that there could be reactions within the United States and complaints from the consumers because of inflation. They'll not get cheaper goods, although much of manufacturing is going back to the US, at least that the effort is. But then they would argue that we will buy the same cheaper products from some other countries in the global south. But as I heard, if I heard correctly, President Trump's plan is to impose even theirs 10 to 20% tariffs on the rest of the countries as well. Maybe he'll be selective, and I think his economic advisors will probably think more wisely, as you have suggested, to deal with this matter. Now, if I could pose a question to Mr. Nikolaevich. Translator, are you there? Yeah, you have proposed Yalta 2, which is a kind of new world order. We know that the present prevailing world order has all but collapsed. But we also know that that world order was predicated on certain principles, not just geographical alliances. But in Yalta 2, I can see that you are trying to create a new balance of power by creating certain alliances. I also saw 7 principles that you mentioned, which will probably be the underpinning principles of this new world order. But should we not evolve this world order from a collective thinking at a platform where every country brings in its inputs? Another Yalta 2 will only be successful if it is not imposed but evolved collectively by various powers that now constitute the multipolar world.
Спасибо за такой системный вопрос.
Thank you very much for this systemic question.
Разделил его бы на 2 составные части ответ.
I would like to divide my answer into 2 parts.
Первое. Моя концепция Ялты-2, она прежде всего нацелена на создание условий, предотвращающих войны и конфликты, в том числе и экономическое соперничество в жесткой форме.
First of all, my concept Yalta 2 is aimed at laying conditions for preventions of war and conflict and also the economic competition.
США, Китай и Россия, как три великие ядерные державы, должны выработать совместные принципы, исходя вот из текущего сложного кризисного миропорядка.
Based on the current crisis world order, the United States, China, and Russia, as three great nuclear powers, must lay common principles of the future world order.
В 1945 году на Ялте Сталин и Черчилль спорили о польском вопросе.
In 1945, in Yalta, Stalin and Churchill argued about the Polish question.
А Рузвельт предложил создать Организацию Объединенных Наций.
And Roosevelt, in turn, proposed to establish the United Nations.
В итоге вышли на современную систему. Я очень рад, что Виктор Гау говорит, она уже многополярная по сути.
And as a result, we reached the current multipolar system, and I was glad to hear that my colleague Victor Gao said that the system that we have is multipolar by default.
Но последние конфликты, в том числе и в секторе Газе, говорят о том, что необходимо дополнительное соглашение между великими державами и объединенными нациями, и такими организациями, как БРИКС и другими.
But the recent conflicts, including the one in Gaza, say that there is an urgent need to strike an agreement between the great powers, the United Nations, and other multilateral institutions, such as BRICS, etc.
Моя линия первая – подписание международной идеологии, возможно, не из тех 7 пунктов, которые я предложил, они могут быть видоизменяться, но главное – курс на мир без войн и конфликтов, и то, что Трамп вот многократно говорил в последние месяцы, что он прекратит войны и конфликты, что он нацелен на обеспечение мира, дает нам шанс всем.
My point is to establish an international ideology, the principles on which the world will be based, a world free from wars and conflicts. And it is very hopeful to hear that President Trump repeated on numerous occasions that he seeks a world free from wars and conflicts.
И главная моя идея, что Великобритания была главным организатором 2 мировых войн.
My key idea is that the United Kingdom stood behind the 2 world wars.
Но не только как государство, но и группа банков, прежде всего Банк Англии, Остинская компания и других, они провоцировали конфликты.
Not as a state, but also as a group of banks, like the Bank of England and the East India Company. These group banks, they supported the conflicts.
То есть Трамп должен подавить глубинное государство внутри США.
Trump must suffocate the US deep state.
Но одновременно мы должны создать новую геополитическую конструкцию на Балканах, в Восточной Европе, которая бы исключила возможность войны в Европе.
But at the same time, we need to create a new configuration, security configuration in the Balkans, in Eastern Europe, that would rule out the possibility of a conflict in Europe.
И главное – дезинтеграция Великобритании. Шотландия войдет во Франконию, Северная Ирландия вместе с Ирландией в Трамповскую Америку, и тем самым у них не будет возможности развязывать конфликты в Европе и мире.
But the most important is the disintegration of the United Kingdom. Scotland should join Franconia, Ireland and Northern Ireland should unite as part of the Trump new United States of America, and that would help to prevent future conflicts.
Все конфликты на Ближнем Востоке начались тогда, когда Великобритания получила Кипр.
All conflicts in the Middle East originated at the time when the United Kingdom gained control over Cyprus,
который достался в результате русско-турецкой войны, в которой Великобритания даже не участвовала.
It was the result of the Russian-Ottoman Empire war, and the United Kingdom did not even participate, was not part of this war.
Если Кипр, Палестина, единое, независимое как государство, войдут в геополитический союз с Сирией, то конфликта на Ближнем Востоке просто не будет.
So if Cyprus and an independent state of Palestine will join the new Assyria, then the Middle East will be free from all conflicts.
То есть в заключение я просто предлагаю, Трамп говорит, он хочет мира без войн и конфликтов, но я предлагаю это юридически закрепить в Минске в ходе Ялты-2, причем я хочу, чтобы это было 17 февраля 2025 года.
In conclusion, I would like to highlight that Trump vows to reach the world free from wars and conflicts. And my point, I would like to make these vows legally binding. And I would like to sign the relevant treaty on February 17, 2025.
То есть не затягивая, пока, как вот Виктор Гау говорил, у нас шанс есть Трампа, но у него есть разные советники, которые могут, чуть не туда вести.
My point is that we should not linger any longer because Trump has his point of view, but he also has, as Mr. Gao said, different advisors who could mislead them.
То есть шанс сегодня, не затягивая, выйти на Ялту-2 в Минске и обозначить, что президент Беларуси Лукашенко, он первым признал победу Трампа и поздравил его с этой победой, выразил надежду на мир, как бы приглашая в Минск.
We must take this chance and we must use it and we must hold this conference Yalta 2 in Minsk because the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, was the first to accept the victory of Donald Trump, to congratulate Donald Trump and de facto invite him to Minsk.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We all wish the world to be free from war and conflict, but we also know that conflict is as old as humanity itself. And when that happens, you need mechanism. That was the rationale behind creating United Nations at that time. Maybe it has outlived its utility, but you would still need something to manage conflicts because conflicts are not going to go away. Victor Gao wants to add something, so after that we'll open the floor for question-answer session.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on what we have been discussing, allow me to make one important proposal. If President Donald Trump really honors his promise of not using war during his 4 years of the presidency, I hope we will really highly propose to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And I hope on the occasion of the Margalla Dialogue 2024, you can keep it in the record that we recommend that Donald Trump being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize if the United States engages in no war in the 4 years. Maybe the name of the prize may be a little bit amended. Nobel Peace Prize, bracket, no war, end of bracket. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for being such a patient audience. We have about 20 minutes. And we'll try to take as many questions as possible. And if you can all kindly be brief, even if you have to make comments. First of all, Mr. Solanki. Do we? Hello? No. Okay, you go ahead.
Do you see another split between China and Russian Federation? And the supplementary question is, if Mr. Trump does not represent the deep state and the establishment of the US, how do we explain his strong rhetoric, aggressive policies towards China, and supporting Israel, even to the extent that Israel should bomb the nuclear facilities of Iran? What kind of anti-war hero is he? Thank you.
I think it's a very important question because it has been argued that if Donald Trump is able to stop the war in Ukraine, that could be used to drive a wedge between Russia and China. And I think that's the essence of the question, first part of the question. Victor Ga.
Thank you for this very important question. First of all, China and Russia are neighboring countries. We share a common border, 4,300 kilometers long. Just a few days ago, in a very important international forum in Russia, one question was posed directly to President Putin. Some people in the United States are talking about new alliance between Russia and the United States to oppose China. And I think President Putin answered it very clearly, and I take him for what he said. He said, well, China-Russian friendship has its own logic, and it's not targeted against any other country, and he kind of expressed a suspicion whether President Trump himself or his administration or the Western countries would reach a point of complete rapprochement between the US and Russia, West and Russia, etc. I personally hope the Ukrainian war should be stopped as quickly as possible. It's fast becoming not a war between Russia and Ukraine. It's a war between Russia versus the United States and NATO using Ukraine as a proxy. That's the danger, I think. So I think between China and Russia, we need to really be very clear-minded. We cannot change the fact that China and Russia are two very important neighbors. I have high admiration for Russia, but today, the size of the Chinese economy is more than 10 times larger than Russia. The Chinese population is more than 10 times larger than Russia. Whereas China always respects Russia, we want to really engage in mutually beneficial relations, and in many sections along the China-Russian border, it's free border. People can just walk over, crossing the river, etc., from Russia to China for breakfast, go back in the evening hours. I hope this kind of good neighborhood, the unarmed long border between China and Russia will be maintained. Allow me to make one final point. I think there will be no lasting peace in Europe by excluding Russia. There will be no lasting peace in the world of today by excluding Russia. So, whether it's President Trump or his administration or otherwise, by engaging or re-engaging Russia is the only right thing. But re-engaging Russia doesn't mean you need to confront China, because that doesn't make sense. China is not an enemy of the United States. China in the world of today, allow me to emphasize, and you may or may not agree with me, probably is the most philosophical country in the world today. We look at the matters of today, not for today, but for the coming 10 years, for the coming 100 years, or even we think about events of today in the coming 1,000 years. We always want to do the right thing, not only for today, but for the coming 100 years, if not for the coming 1,000 years. Thank you.
Important points. Mr. Valinas.
I think it's important to distinguish that President Trump is not a pacifist. It's not true that he doesn't want war. He just doesn't want the Americans pay for it and fight for it. So if other people can do wars that doesn't involve the United States, he's perfectly happy with that. And that's the message to Israelis, that you finish the job, whatever it is, we don't want to do it. But also, the issue with this path that the United States is on is that you can hope for the best, but you have to be prepared for the worst. What the United States is really proposing ultimately is economic warfare. They don't call it that, they call it economic statecraft, but it's economic warfare. We saw on the eve of World War II that economic warfare on Japan, of putting blockades on Japan, trying to choke it off, ultimately led to Pearl Harbor and the Pacific War. And in the case of the first term of President Trump, economic warfare on Iran brought Iran and the United States very close to open warfare. In other words, choking Iran's economy led Iran to attack tankers, attack oil facilities, and ultimately led to the killing of General Soleimani and a tense 48 hours in which they might have gone to war. And it was at that point that President Trump backed off. Now, the lesson that Iran's learned and others will learn is actually the way to deal with economic warfare is to threaten real war. Because it's not logic that's going to get President Trump to back off from his philosophy, which is that he can have his way, is actually to bring him to the point to realize that economic warfare can lead to open warfare. So I do believe that in the long run, logic will prevail, as Dr. Gao says. But the question is surviving the short run. And you know, the United States may try every other option before settling on the right one, but that could also be quite damaging to the world economy by the time it realizes that.
Introduce yourself, if you may. The gentleman behind you. We'll come to you.
Thank you very much, sir. I am Major General and I'm retired. I'm a researcher and I write occasionally, sir. My question is about the President Trump. My question is to Mr. Wali, sir. Nice to see you here in Pakistan, sir, and I hope I follow your writings. If you look at the American scene, the conventional wisdom is that the American politics is decided by the domestic sentiment. And the domestic sentiment for this election was anti-incumbency and anti-elite. And there was a lot of rural rage against the elite of whatever you call it. However, the decision of the election is 52% in favor of one candidate and 49.1% in favor of Hillary. So the nation is still very divided. And if you look at this division, all those haves are with the Hillary. The academia, the journalist community, the analyst community, the think tanks, majority of them are with them, and the armed forces. Now, having said that, in your opinion, how much would be President Trump's room for maneuver in the next 4 years, particularly for his implementing his vision of creative disruption, as the New York Times called it? Thank you, sir.
May I propose that we take a couple of questions and then we'll take one last round to answer those questions. Yes, sir, here, and then the gentleman there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think a really great session. My question actually is for the professor from the U.S. You said, I think it's highly likely President Trump will use economic war, even military war. So I think that could be the case. My question is what is the benefits and the costs of that kind of wars for the U.S. and for the world? Economically, I think in the past few years, especially since 2018, U.S. has a lot of created a lot of troubles for the Chinese economy. But the reality is the Chinese economy is continue to grow pretty rapidly, and the U.S. is not really gaining anything from that. Even in high tech, China is making very rapid progress. So if we talk about military war, I think probably a big country and small country, U.S. will benefit from that. But war among huge countries, I'm not sure that's really good for the U.S. I would really want to hear your comments. Thank you very much.
Yeah, he had raised his hands first, so I would like to go to him and then Professor Ashfaq Hassan Khan.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening to all. My question to Sir Mushahid Hussain and Mr. Gao is that US-Mexico trade volume is almost $800 billion US. China has a comparable economy to the United States, but unlike Mexico and US trade volume, Pakistan-China trade volume stands at $24 billion US, where we just export approximately $3 billion US to China and we import $21 billion worth of good from China. So how can we, solve this trade imbalance? And my second question, kind of supplementary to the general geopolitical situation in Europe from Mr. Volkanovich, is how do you see the Russia-Ukraine war finishing? What's the logical end of it? Thank you.
Professor.
Thank you, sir. My name is Dr. Ishfaq, and my question is directed to Professor Wali Nasser from Johns Hopkins University, my fellow alumni. So in your presentation, you pointed out that relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States was conditional upon Saudi Arabia normalizing its relationship with Israel, and in return, the United States will take care of the security aspect of Saudi Arabia. But then you pointed out that now going forward, the US and Saudi relationship will depend upon how much Saudi Arabia is delinking with China. My question is regarding Pakistan. Pakistan and China is a strategic friend, allies for decades. Do you think that the same logic will apply to Pakistan, that Pakistan and US relationship will normalize to the extent that Pakistan delinked from China? Am I correct in this analysis, sir?
Thank you, sir. Last question from gentleman here, because we must give the panelists some time before lunch to answer their questions.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Nader Turk, Deputy Head of Mission Palestine Embassy. First, I like to thank Islamabad Policy Research Institute for showing the losses of Palestinians, innocent people who are killed daily in cold blood by the Israelis, by Americans' whoopings. Genocide continues and show the failure of international organization, international society to find a solution following the international resolution, following the international court's orders to end this genocide and these crimes against humanity. And thanks for Pakistan government leadership for their strong and very clear support following the vision of Qaid Azam, may Allah bless his soul. By two things right now, it become part of the foreign policy of Pakistan. First, end supplying weapons for the Israelis because it is used to kill more and more Palestinians, innocent and against civilians. Second, phrase the membership of Israelis in the United Nations because they are not following orders and resolution of United Nations. According to that, they are not deserve to continue their membership in the United Nations. Third thing right now on the table, it is a campaign created by our brother in Saudi Arabia, thanks for them, to make international campaign to facilitate the establishing of Palestinian state, independent state, in according to two-state strategy. According to the question right
because
now.
Because Pakistan, stands with you, but we need to wind up because of lunch.
I will continue with this. Mr. Trump, as a businessman, do you think him going to continue blindly support for Israelis against international law, continuous developing and supply weapons, or he will follow the majority of the world, majority of humanity, to end this genocide, not only end the war in Ukraine, but end the conflict and the war in Palestine, Gaza, and everywhere? Thank you very much.
Very clear question. May I propose that we start with Professor Igor on the far left of the podium, and then come down to Senator Mushahid. Please, Professor Igor.
Спасибо. Я кратко хотел Виктора поддержать, что российско-китайские отношения крепкие, и я очень хотел бы, чтобы они продолжали укрепляться.
First of all, I would like to join my colleague Victor Gao in supporting his statement that the relations between China and Russia are very strong, and I really hope that they will get even stronger in the future.
Теперь по Трампу был первый вопрос. Я хотел обратить внимание, он касается ответа на вопрос, когда закончатся конфликты на Украине и на Ближнем Востоке.
First of all, I would like to answer the question about when the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East will end.
Я смотрел все дебаты Трампа в прямом эфире и с Байденом, и с Харрис и так далее.
I have watched Trump debates versus Biden and versus Harris live.
Мы уже не раз говорили о дезинформации. Очень часто некоторые его фразы вырывались из контекста и по-другому трактовались.
We have repeatedly were talking about the disinformation, and some of his phrases were taken out of context and misinterpreted.
Но что касается завершения конфликта и на Украине, и на Ближнем Востоке, Трамп постоянно об этом говорил беспрерывно.
But when with regard to the end of conflicts in Ukraine and in the Middle East, Trump has repeatedly talking about it.
Это его стратегическая линия.
This is his strategic position.
Что касается Ближнего Востока, я хотел бы обратить внимание, что на митинге в Мичигане мусульманские общины США полностью поддержали Трампа и отметили его изменение политики по отношению к Израилю.
As for the Middle East, I would like to focus on the Michigan rally, where the Muslims of the United States of America wholeheartedly supported Trump and his change of positions vis-à-vis Israel.
В первую администрацию многое решала Иванка, его дочь Трамп, и зять Кушнер.
During his first term, Ivanka Trump and Kushner were the major decision makers.
Они во многом определяли ближневосточную линию и поддержку Израиля.
They were the ones who determined the Middle East policy of the United States and the U.S. support to Israel.
Сейчас команда Трампа кардинально изменилась.
Now Trump's team has drastically changed.
И я верю в то, что его слова по завершению конфликта на Ближнем Востоке будут реализовываться на деле.
And I hope he will proceed from words to action in terms of ending the conflict in the Middle East.
Что касается украинского кризиса, я Виктора поддерживаю, когда он говорит, что это не российско-украинский кризис, а столкновение России с коллективным Западом и НАТО.
As for the Ukrainian crisis, I wholeheartedly support my colleague Victor Gao, who said that this is not a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. This is a conflict between Russia and the collective West.
Линия Трампа на то, что он не начал ни одной войны и прекратит, в том числе и восточноевропейский кризис, мне кажется, будет реализовываться.
And I think that Trump's statement that he hasn't begun any new wars and that he is determined to put an end to an Eastern European crisis, I hope that he will make these words come true.
Я еще раз хотел бы показать вот эту книгу, где фотография Сталина, Рузвельта и Черчилля в Ялте.
I would like once again to present my book. It depicts Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin in Yalta.
Рузвельт в центре, и Трамп тоже будет в центре мирного урегулирования конфликта в Восточной Европе.
As you see, Roosevelt is in the center of this peace process, and Trump will also be in the center of a peacemaking process in Eastern Europe.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Gao?
Thank you very much. Allow me to make a very brief point about the Palestinian tragedies. I think we all need to unite together to condemn the atrocities and war crimes against the Palestinian civilians. More than 40,000 of them, 75% of them are women and children, including many pregnant women. No man, no country, no civilization with the right, decent mind should ever tolerate that. Now, the United States keeps saying that they will give unconditional support to Israel. I hope the United States will make one amendment to that they can give unconditional support to Israel if Israel does the right thing. But they should never give unconditional support to Israel if Israel does the wrong thing, especially in committing crimes and atrocities against the Palestinian civilians. Now, the second point, I spoke to a very distinguished Palestinian leader before I left Beijing. And he said something I want to share with you, and I hope we will agree with him. He said, the state of Palestine is a fait accompli. So what the world need to call on is for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the occupied land of the state of Palestine. I think this is the right moment. We should no longer just talk about two-state solution. The two-state solution is a fait accompli. The fact is that Israel is in occupation of Palestinian land. They even want to seize Gaza to turn it into a tourist resort, to a prime property project. That's the wrong thing. No one in the right sense of the mind should ever tolerate that. And I think the fact that 75% of the people in Israel condemn Prime Minister Netanyahu and call for his withdrawal from the government or sending him to prison gives us hope that the people in Israel probably are doing the right thing in calling for his ouster from the government rather than continuing these atrocities. Allow me to pay my highest respect to the Palestinian people and my great mourning for all the people who are lost in Gaza and elsewhere in the Middle East as a result of the atrocities committed by Israel against innocent people. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wali Nasr.
Thank you very much. So first of all, on the question about Gaza, just look at President Trump's appointments of ambassador to Israel, Middle East envoy. It's very clear. No, the answer is very simply no. What we are talking about right now is annexation of West Bank. Now, that's on the table since Trump has come to power. The issue of forcing Egypt or transacting with Egypt to take 2.5 million Palestinians from Gaza and resettle them. So Gaza does not appear at a level that actually impacts his thinking. The only issue in the Middle East that he might be able to correct is actually the issue of Iran, because that involves a war that might involve the United States directly. So on the issue of Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, I don't know. I mean, you have to get to that point and see what would be on the table. But it goes to where the situation for the global South is going. And in a world that is viewed as blocks, particularly from Washington, yes, it does give countries certain opportunity to leverage the relations with China to get something more from the United States. But it is not the old world in which they could assume that they could have relations with both and take advantage of both. And they are put in situations that they have to choose. I mean, on the question of whether Trump can get everything done, that's the open question. And many people would say that he's overreaching. He wants to, change the balance of trade with China completely. He wants to expel 11 million migrants from the United States. He wants to recreate the entire bureaucracy in Washington. And this is a very tall order, any one of these. And it's quite possible that he won't go very far. But we won't know until he tries it, and then what kind of a damage trying it will do. I mean, he may fail at it, but at what cost? Now, you mentioned, the gentleman mentioned that the attempt to slow China's rise has not worked. I don't believe that's the assumption of the administration, Biden or Trump, that it hasn't worked. And if they come to the conclusion it hasn't worked, there is no reassessment to say this is the wrong strategy. In fact, Trump's argument is that it hasn't worked because enough pressure hasn't been applied. So you double down. I think the issue, you have to recognize that at least since the end of Obama, it started with Obama, but especially when Trump came in, the United States has bought into a strategy. Right or wrong, it has bought into a strategy of changing the balance of power between the United States and China by as he said, by kneecapping China, as Dr. Gao said, by denying it things, and that strategic viewpoint hasn't changed and is not changing. And when a superpower signs up to a strategic view at this magnitude, it's not changing as easily. I don't see a moment of reckoning among American political class of either Democratic or the Republican side, in Congress, in media, etc., that is basically questioning this strategy in the manner that you're suggesting. And yes, the United States doesn't want war, although talk of a war over Taiwan is much more prominent in Washington than perhaps it's outside. But as I said, you may not want war, but war may want you. I mean, the path that the United States is going down of escalating pressure on China on, and escalating pressure on other countries, at some point may have a logic of its own. And so, yes, as I said, we can hope for the best. We can hope that Trump in his first year, fails in achieving many things, or that there is a reassessment, but we should also be prepared for the worst, which is that the world order as we knew it is going to come off the rails, but not in the positive way that many people think in the global south. That the superpowers are going to weaken and we're going to have an egalitarian world order. That things may go wrong in a way that is actually very damaging to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Turk, for your comment. I just want to mention that the Palestine question has had a very deep impact and resonance in the Western political consciousness since Tufan al-Aqsa, especially among the youth and among a lot of the other communities also. And I think it is one factor in the defeat of Kamala Harris was Palestine. Just as Palestine was a factor in the defeat of the Conservatives in Britain, because 5 people in the House of Commons today in UK won the election on the basis of Palestine issue alone. And the young man also asked a question. My conviction was confirmed that Trump is coming in on 29th of May 2024. There was an American public opinion survey done by a Democratic Party firm called Blueprint. And they asked the youth, and this is in the summer of 2024, American youth about what is happening. 64% of American youth said that America is in decline. And the pollster said very interestingly, Evan Smith is his name, very famous pollster, he said they feel that America is a dying empire led by bad people because of what they're doing in Palestine. So the impact of Palestinian issue is so strong among the broader consciousness. And finally, I'd like to add that you mentioned about the war, another thing. I was reading a study in Harvard University done by Professor Graham Allison. And he did 5 war scenarios of a potential war between the US and China. And according to the war gaming he did, in all 5 scenarios on Taiwan and Southeast Asia, China wins because America has never won a land war in Asia. And finally, when I went to Washington a couple of years ago, they asked me, tell us, Senator, what side are you on? Are you with the US or are you with China? I said, we are on the right side of history, and history is about Asian century and the Asian resurgence. So in that regard, I think that whether it's China or the global south, the world is being transformed, and I think Pakistan's role is pivotal in this transformation in the most important part of this globe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It has been an engaging session. Several good ideas came to the fore for us to ponder on. I would not like to stand between you and the lunch, but I must take a moment to thank, on behalf of all participants, Islamabad Policy Research Institute, Special General Raza, for hosting us and providing us this opportunity to share our thoughts. So thank you so much. Please join me in a hand of applause for the panelists.